There was a shape in the second-floor window, not moving toward the glass, just occupying it, too tall, too still, and it was looking directly at us. I need to back up. It was August of 2019, and I was 20 years old, spending the summer between sophomore and junior year, back home in Harlan County, Kentucky. My friends Mark and Leo had been talking all season about the old Pemberton estate on Route 119, a rotting Victorian wreck set back from the road behind 40 years of kudzu and bad reputation. Real Appalachian horror stories start exactly like this, I know. But we weren't looking for a story, we were bored, we were stupid. And Sarah had her instant camera, we weren't going inside. That was the rule we all agreed on before we even got out of the car. We'd walk the perimeter, maybe peek through a window or two, and Sarah would take some atmospheric photos for the photography elective she was retaking in the fall. That was it. That was the whole plan. What I still can't explain is why the plan felt so reasonable at the time, given everything we already knew about that house. The kudzu had swallowed the front porch entirely, so we circled around back through grass that came up to our thighs. The air was thick. August in eastern Kentucky is a different animal than August anywhere else, the kind of humidity that makes the dark feel physical, like something you have to push through. Sarah's camera flashed every 30 seconds or so, little explosions of white light that turned the warped siding and broken window frames into brief, terrible paintings. Each flash died and left us blinder than before. Mark heard it first. A single footstep from somewhere inside, heavy and deliberate, transmitted through the old floorboards like a bass note through a speaker cabinet. He grabbed my arm without saying anything. I felt his grip and understood immediately. And then Leo made a sound I'd never heard from him before, not a word, just a sharp intake of breath, and pointed up. The shape in the window was standing in what had once been a bedroom on the second floor. I used the word standing loosely because whatever posture it held didn't quite match the geometry of a human body. It was tall enough that it had to angle itself slightly under the window frame, and its proportions, the length of its torso, the position of its shoulders, were wrong in a way that took my brain a full second to process. The way a misspelled word takes a moment to register. It wasn't moving. It was just watching us. I'm telling you this part carefully because I need you to understand. We did not imagine it. Sarah's camera was already in her hand. She didn't lift it on purpose. The flash fired, on reflex. The shape stepped back into the darkness of the room. One smooth, unhurried step, like a person who'd been caught staring across a restaurant and was simply choosing to disengage. We ran. There's no dignified version of what happened next. We ran through the high grass and scrambled over the fence we'd climbed on the way in and drove 14 miles back toward Harlan without a single person in that car saying one word. We agreed, without agreeing, not to talk about it. That held for exactly 1 week, until Sarah's photos finished developing. The picture she'd taken without meaning to, the reflex flash, came out clear. Appalachian small village stories always talk about evidence that can't be explained away, and I understand that skepticism. I had it too, before that photograph. The shape is visible in the window, both hands braced against the frame. Head tilted, at that wrong angle. The flash had caught it mid-step backward, one foot already retreating into the dark. Sarah keeps the photo in a shoebox on a shelf she doesn't open. She told me once that the hardest part isn't the shape itself. The hardest part is that in the photo, you can tell it had been standing there for a while, long enough to settle into position, long enough to get comfortable, long enough to feel like it knew we were coming. The Black Archive holds one more account from Harlan County, but the next file comes from a church that shouldn't still be standing. The man inside said something to the window, and whatever was on the other side of the glass answered. I study Appalachian folklore for a living, which means I've sat across from a lot of people who've seen things I can't explain, but Elias Cord is the only person who has ever made me genuinely afraid to look out a window. I found him through a chain of referrals that took most of that summer. 3 months of driving mountain roads in Breathitt County, recording oral histories from residents of communities so small they don't register on GPS. Elias had led the same congregation for 37 years, from a church hall 12 miles outside of Jackson, Kentucky. Retired now, but the word retired didn't sit right on him. He had the careful stillness of a man still very much on duty. He agreed to an interview without hesitation. He made coffee. He talked easily about the choir, about the community, about the history of the land. And then when I asked him what he considered his life's true work, he answered, without pausing. "Managing the boundary," he said. He meant it practically, the way a farmer talked about managing soil. A necessary, unglamorous, ongoing maintenance. The mountains had presences, he explained, old ones, Not evil in the way we use that word, but territorial. Indifferent to human life, the way weather is indifferent. His role, passed down from the minister before him, was to maintain a specific grammar of behavior, a set of inherited rules and spoken acknowledgments that kept those presences from treating the community as unclaimed territory. These weren't prayers, he was careful to say. They were more like terms of an agreement, protocols. You don't walk the ridgeline after dusk. You don't burn cedar after a death. You speak aloud when you enter old growth. Not because the woods are listening, they are, but because announcing yourself is what keeps you human in the encounter. I was scribbling notes as fast as I could, trying not to interrupt his rhythm. That's when he stopped, mid-sentence. Not a pause, not a breath. He simply stopped, and in the absence of his voice, I noticed how completely silent the room had become. Not the neutral quiet of an empty building, but the specific, pressurized silence that fills a space when something has arrived in it. Elias turned his head toward the window. It was dark outside. I couldn't see anything beyond the reflection of the overhead light in the glass. He said, calmly and without any adjustment to his tone, "I see you, but you cannot come in." 3 seconds of silence. Then he turned back to me and continued his sentence exactly where he'd left it, as if he'd simply cleared his throat. I did not look at the window. I want to be clear about that. I made a deliberate choice not to. Some part of me understood, sitting in that room recording this man's voice, that the rules he described applied to me now too. That looking was an acknowledgement. That acknowledgement was an invitation. These kinds of unexplained mountain encounters don't always announce themselves dramatically. Sometimes they're just a pause in a conversation and a man looking out a window. Sometimes the most terrifying thing is the complete absence of fear in someone who should be terrified. Elias poured more coffee before I left. He shook my hand at the door. He said he hoped the recording would be useful. I drove back to Jackson with both hands tight on the wheel and the recorder running the whole way because I didn't want to reach over and touch it. When I got back to my motel room, I reviewed the audio from the session. Elias's voice mid-sentence. The stop. The silence. His 3 words, "to the window." And just at the edge of audible, in the 2 seconds before he resumed speaking, not outside the window, not from down the hall, but from somewhere the microphone cannot locate, something responds. I've had 3 audio engineers listen to it. None of them have told me what it says. 2 of them have told me they don't want to listen again. Some of the most terrifying, unexplained mountain encounters happen on land that has been in the same family for generations. The next file proves it. A rule was broken. A man came back from the eastern ridge. He never spoke of what he found there, but his family has been waiting for the consequences ever since. My great-grandmother May was not a superstitious woman. I want to be clear about that before I tell you any of this, because the framing matters. She was a practical woman, sharp, unsentimental, the kind of person who kept receipts and remembered every slight and never said anything she didn't mean. So when she gave the family its one rule about the eastern ridge, she gave it the way she gave every rule, without explanation and without negotiation. No one crosses onto the eastern ridge past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. No one goes to that part of the woods alone, ever. We grew up with that rule the way you grew up with the location of the fuse box, not examined, just known. The eastern ridge was 40 acres of dense hardwood at the back of our family's property outside Whitesburg, Kentucky, and we simply didn't go there. No one asked why. The rule had been in the family longer than anyone could trace, passed down through people who had learned it from people who'd learned it before them, a chain of inherited caution that stretched back past the point where family memory becomes Appalachian folklore. What I understood, the way children understand things they're never told directly, was that the ridge wasn't ours. The property deed said it was, but the ridge operated under a different arrangement. A peace brokered by someone before May, honored by May, and expected to be honored by us. You don't build on it, you don't clear-cut it, you don't walk into it alone after mid-afternoon. In exchange, whatever claimed that ridge stayed there. For 3 generations, it worked. My cousin Marcus was 22 when his dog got loose and ran toward the tree line. October, a Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was home for fall break. It was 4:15 in the afternoon when he went in after it. He came back 2 hours later without the dog. He was pale. The way people get pale when their body has decided something fundamental about survival. The color not of shock, but of conclusion. He sat down at the kitchen table and he didn't speak for the rest of the night. He didn't eat. He barely blinked. My aunt tried twice to ask him what happened, and both times he looked at her like the question was in a language he used to speak. Marcus never hunted again, never walked near the back field again. He moved into Whitesburg the following spring, and took a job at a hardware store and built a life specifically constructed around never having to go back to that property. He died of a heart attack at 51, and not once in the 30 years between October and his death did he tell anyone, not a doctor, not his wife, not me, what he saw on that ridge. Whatever the terms of that treaty were, Marcus wasn't the one who negotiated them. He didn't know the grammar the way Elias from the next county over knew it. He just walked in and saw what was there. And he spent the rest of his life trying to be a person who hadn't. We sold the property in 2018. I wasn't part of that decision. An investment group out of Nashville paid well over market value. They had plans for a private retreat, cabins, some kind of glamping concept that never materialized. They weren't from the mountains. They didn't know what they were buying. I tried once to explain the rule. The agent looked at me the way people look at you when they've decided to be polite about the fact that they've stopped listening. The ridge doesn't care about the deed. It never did. It operated on a different kind of contract, one that required active maintenance, ongoing acknowledgement, a family that remembered what it owed. That contract didn't transfer with the title. It dissolved the moment a stranger's name went on the paper. I don't know who's out there now. I don't know what those developers have built or not built, what they've cleared or not cleared. I don't know if any of them have walked into the Eastern Ridge past 3 in the afternoon alone. But I know what happened to Marcus, and I know he never told us anything, which means whatever's waiting out there, it's still waiting. And it's been waiting a lot longer than those developers have been alive. True scary stories from the mountains tend to share one quality. Someone ignored a warning. The next account is no different. She was alone in the woods with her dog. The children at the edge of her property weren't wearing coats, and when the little girl raised her finger, she was pointing directly into the dark. I moved to the cabin in Mingo County, West Virginia, because I needed to stop being findable for a while. That's the honest version. The version I told people was that I needed quiet to paint, which was also true. I'm a freelance illustrator. I work from wherever my laptop and my supply cases can travel, and the rental was cheap and remote and came with a wood stove and 30 acres of forest and no cell signal worth mentioning. My rescue dog, a 3-legged shepherd mix named Clove, approved of the squirrel situation. I approved of the silence. I'd been there 6 weeks when I saw them. It was a Tuesday in mid-November, maybe 5:30 in the afternoon. Already dark by then, the way it gets dark early in the West Virginia hollows, the mountains cutting the sky down to a narrow strip of gray. I'd gone out to the porch to call Clove in for dinner, and I saw them standing at the property line, right where the tree line begins. 2 children, a girl and a boy, small, maybe 8 and 10 years old. They were wearing summer clothes, not light jackets, summer clothes. A sundress on the girl, white with small yellow flowers, shorts and a short-sleeved shirt on the boy. It was 34 degrees and had been raining on and off all day. The ground at the edge of my property was a solid sheet of November mud. Their clothes were immaculate. Their shoes were clean. They looked like they'd been lifted out of a July afternoon and placed into the gray mouth of my November evening without the weather touching them once. Clove was on the porch beside me and she didn't bark. She pressed herself against the back of my legs and made a sound I'd never heard from her. Not a growl, not a whimper, something lower and more fundamental, a sound that belonged in her bones. I called out to them, asked if they were lost, if they needed help, if their parents were nearby. My voice went out and the woods absorbed it, and the children just watched me. Their faces were visible at that distance, upturned, expressionless. No shivers, no movement. The kind of stillness that isn't calm but is something else entirely. The stillness of something that has chosen not to move rather than something that is resting. And then the girl raised her arm. She pointed into the woods behind her, into the dark space between the trees where the path that might be a path disappears into the part of the property I'd never explored. The gesture was slow and deliberate. Not the way a child points to show you something interesting. The way a hand moves when it's absolutely certain. Every instinct I have fired at once. I turned around and went inside. I locked the deadbolt, the chain, the sliding bolt at the top that I'd never bothered with before. I pulled Clove inside and I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets, and I did not look out the windows for a long time. It was only later, sitting there in the too-warm kitchen with the wood stove ticking, that I registered what I hadn't registered in the moment. The children had made no sound. Not when I first saw them. No footsteps through the wet leaves, no voices, no movement of undergrowth. And not during the encounter itself. I'd called out to them. Clove had made her bone-deep sound. The wind had moved through the trees. But from the children, nothing, not a leaf displaced, not a breath visible in air cold enough to show one. The man who runs the general store in Kermit, when I drove out to tell someone what I'd seen, didn't look surprised. He looked tired. He said there'd been accounts of those children going back as far as his grandfather's time. He told me that following where the girl pointed was the last thing anyone who saw them ever did. He said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd state a local traffic pattern. I finished my rental contract remotely and sent the keys back in an envelope. I've never returned to Mingo County. I paint differently now. Something changed in my relationship to negative space, to the way darkness sits in the corners of a composition. My work has gotten darker. Galleries seem to like it. Clove still sometimes presses herself against the back of my legs for no reason I can identify. And I think about the immaculate children, the way you think about something you almost stepped into, with the specific cold gratitude of someone who doesn't know how close it was. If these true scary stories have stirred up an unexplained mountain encounter you've been holding on to from your own life in the mountains, drop it in the comments. The archive wants to hear it. But first, the final file. An environmental scientist rented a cabin for 2 weeks in rural Tennessee. On his last night, someone was standing outside his bedroom window. They were humming. I've measured mercury levels in floodplain soil and tracked contamination plumes through fractured limestone aquifers, and once spent 4 days camped next to a Superfund site in Ohio for a baseline assessment. I am not, professionally or personally, a person who frightens easily. I say this so you understand that what happened in that cabin in Sevier County, Tennessee, didn't happen to someone who startles at branches or invents noises in the dark. I rented the cabin from a woman named Beatrice Harwell, mid-70s, silver-haired, matter-of-fact in the way that specific generation of Appalachian women tends to be matter-of-fact. She handed me the keys of the road, pointed at the woodpile, and told me the well pump sometimes needed priming. She mentioned, almost incidentally, that her family had owned the land for 90 years. She mentioned it like it mattered. I filed it away and forgot it. The first week was exactly what I'd come for. 14-hour fieldwork days and dreamless sleep and the particular satisfaction of data that behaves. The cabin was modest. 1 bedroom, a main room with a cast iron stove, 2 windows per side. The nearest occupied structure was 4 miles back toward the highway. Pigeon Forge tourist noise didn't reach this far into the hollow. It was quiet in a way that felt earned. Night 9, 2:07 in the morning. I remember the microwave clock. I came awake completely, the way you do when the sound that woke you was already over. I lay still. And then I heard it again. The front door handle, turning slowly, releasing, turning again, not rattling, testing. Methodical and patient, the motion of someone, checking rather than forcing, then footsteps on the porch. Deliberate, unhurried. Moving toward the right side of the cabin, I want to explain the quality of those footsteps because it's the part that's hardest to convey. There was no urgency in them, no attempt at concealment. They were the footsteps of something that wasn't concerned about being heard. Something that understood the difference between the sounds that matter and the sounds that don't, and had classified me, alone in a cabin at 2 in the morning, as a sound that didn't matter. The steps rounded the corner, paused at the side window, moved on, rounded to the back, paused, moved on. I tracked them through the full perimeter of the cabin. Door, right wall, left wall, front again. A complete, careful inspection. Every exit point checked, every window assessed. I sat in the center of the bedroom floor with a Maglite flashlight in both hands and did not sleep again until the sky outside began to gray. I told myself it was a person, probably a person. Hikers camped nearby, disoriented. Someone from town who'd misjudged the dark. I told myself this through day 10 and day 11 with the mechanical insistence of someone who knows they're lying to themselves but isn't ready for the alternative. Night 12 was the last night, and the last night was different. I was awake before it started. Couldn't have said why, just found myself conscious at 3:04 in the morning with the specific alertness of a body that has received information it hasn't passed to the mind yet. It was right outside the bedroom window. Not the front door, not the perimeter, the bedroom window 2 feet from where I was lying. And it was humming, a tune I didn't recognize. Rhythmic and low and self-contained, the way a person hums to themselves while doing dishes or folding laundry. Not a performance, not directed at anything, simply the ambient sound of something going about its private business. Unbothered. At home. At home in the dark. At home outside the bedroom window of a stranger's rented cabin at 3 in the morning in a Tennessee hollow, humming. The sound didn't accelerate when I shifted in the bed. It didn't pause. It continued with the serene consistency of something that doesn't feel observed, or doesn't care if it is, or, and this is the thought that finally broke my ability to rationalize, something that has done this before and found no reason to behave differently. I sat against the headboard with the Maglite, and I did not move, and I did not make a sound, and I counted the minutes until the sky began to change. The humming stopped sometime before dawn. I don't know exactly when. I might have drifted. I'm not certain. I loaded my equipment cases into the truck in the first full light of morning, not rushing because rushing felt like confirmation of something I wasn't willing to confirm. I called Beatrice Harwell to let her know I was leaving early. She asked if everything was all right. I told her I'd had some disturbances, something circling the cabin at night, and on the last night, directly outside the window. There was a pause. She said, "Did it touch the window?" I said it hadn't. Another pause. "And then you did fine." She hung up. I've called the number twice since. It rings and no one answers. I've worked field assignments in 32 states. I drive past the Sevier County exit sometimes on the way to other projects, and I've never once considered stopping. Whatever Beatrice knew about that land, whatever 90 years of her family's accumulated knowledge had produced, it was enough to rent the cabin and not enough to warn a stranger. I keep thinking about the humming, the ease of it, the absolute, untroubled comfort of something in the dark that has never once needed to be afraid. That kind of comfort belongs to something that has never been challenged, something that has been out there circling in the dark for a very long time, something that knows the check is never coming. I just hope it never figures out there's no one left who knows the rules. The archive is closed for tonight. If these true scary stories from the mountains have stirred up something from your own life, a rule you were given, something you saw at a tree line, a sound you've never been able to explain, send it to us. Drop it in the comments or find our submission link. Subscribe if you want to come back. There's more in the archive. Click the next file.